Hello, and welcome to the first in quite a while Big Finish review that I have done. In December in the Advent Calendar, we had Adam do the first War Master box set, but that was not me. The last one I think I did was probably that one I did with Adam. That was the Holy Terror, which was probably about a year ago. That was so long ago now. I think it may have even been before that, because it was before we had lockdown. Wow, that's crazy. But yeah, we are here to be reviewing the Big Finish box set called Ravagers, which is more importantly, the first time that Christopher Eccleston has done Doctor Who in 16 years since that last shoot he did of Boomtown in like January 2005. He has finally come back like a bat out of hell and decided to do Big Finish, which was huge news. And here we are. We have now actually listened to 3 more Christopher Eccleston episodes of Doctor Who. It's kind of crazy, but I'm all for it. I'm glad that he's here. I've got Callum here to review it with me. You all know how we feel about the Ninth Doctor, especially coming off, many videos where we talked about him, and also that marathon we did on your channel, where it just seemed like it was just like we watched every single episode, and just like with pretty much all of them, that was better than the last time I watched it, with like pretty much all 13 of them.
Yeah, pretty much. I think every single one was like that for sure.
And it just really pointed out how bulletproof the Ninth Doctor's character really is on TV. And so there was a lot to live up to, let's say that, because the Ninth Doctor on TV is one of the most flawlessly written characters I think I've ever seen in anything. He's also one of the best acted, and he's one of my favourites as well. Not just for nostalgia, but also rewatching it, the craft from Russell T Davies' writing and Christopher Eccleston's acting and everything else in between is just impeccable and extraordinary. And I think you feel the same way about his portrayal on TV, Callum.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Like, for the Ninth Doctor, he is like, in such a short amount of time, the amount of time spent on his character is pretty brilliant. It's 13 episodes. It's a very concise, very well done arc in just 13 episodes and just under around 12 hours of TV time. Just how Russell managed to start an arc, end an arc for one character for the Ninth, going from the sting of the Time War to the end where he can open up again in the most summary way I can describe it.
Yep. And also
pretty brilliant.
A launch pad for the 10th Doctor as well. It's crazy how much work the Ninth Doctor's character does to set up the 10th Doctor's character as well.
Yeah.
It's pretty damn extraordinary.
I think a lot of people forget that.
Oh yeah. It's just kind of blows me away how he became, to me anyway, one of the best Doctors we've ever had in just one season. That to me is weird, but brilliant. So, with that said, that means that there is lots to live up to on Big Finish. Now, I don't necessarily expect the same level of perfection, because I don't think that there are really many writers who could live up to that, because I think Russell T Davies is a very, very unique, special writer, and especially when he's in his prime and when he's got a really dead-on focus on what he's doing, he absolutely is one of the best writers ever. And in another review we're going to be filming today, we'll get onto that. But that being said, there is a lot of material there to work with to maintain a really good character and utilize the Ninth Doctor in different ways that we haven't seen before. And on top of the fact that there's so many fans that have wanted to see him do more things, not just because of one season, but because he's just so damn good. And there's so much excitement around seeing Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor again. In this case, obviously, it's hearing rather than seeing. But, have a bit of imagination, you can sort of see what you're hearing. But there's a lot going into this. So, with that said, Ravagers is a 3-episode box set that takes place over one story. Technically, if you count it as one story, it's actually the longest Ninth Doctor story when you think about it.
Yeah, because they're all around about 40 minutes to an hour.
It's
It's
about this story is about it's pretty much the same length as the director's cut of Utopia Sound of Drums Last of the Time Lords, because the director's cut of Last of the Time Lords is about the same length as Food Fight, and the other 2 episodes are 45 minutes. Obviously the broadcast version was 45 minutes because they cut out scenes, but Russell was not happy about that, and on all like DVD releases and streaming releases, he added in the extra scenes he wanted in, and they are really good scenes anyway. But this story is about as long as that, so there's a lot of time to work with. And considering the kind of ambitious concept around this box set, I think it was a smart move. I'm also glad that it's not like other box sets, because with the 10th Doctor Adventures, at least the first 3, because obviously we've gotten like the Dalek Universe stuff now. I haven't actually listened to it, but we've gotten like Dalek Universe, and there's like a River Song set as well. I don't know much about that. But the first 3 with Donna and Rose, they are just individual episodes. They are just fun adventures back to back. And I'm glad that we didn't get that with this, because Chris Eccleston's Doctor, there is so much, there to work with. Is sort of the sky's the limit. Unlike someone like Tennant, where you've kind of, the TV show kind of covered everything you'd really need to with this character, and anything on top of that is just going to be subsequential, and it won't really be as interesting, because it won't really add much on that you could, because a lot of it was already covered. Whereas with Christopher Eccleston, whilst his character arc is complete on TV, there is still a lot you can do with it. So I like that. Briggs in this box set has gone for a 3-episode arc that goes over one story, which is much more ambitious than I thought they would, and I'm glad that they did that. But the question is, the bottom line is, you can have all that fancy shit. The question is Ravagers actually good? And my answer to that is yes, but I don't think it's top tier, but I think it's solid, if that makes sense. I think it's just good, if you know what I mean.
I agree. I think Ravagers is a really solid, just nice, fun story. I think in terms of how it's structured in some areas, I think especially we'll get into more detail, but especially the first part, I guess you could say, there were some things I had a little issues in terms of how the story was structured, but overall, it's a coherent story, makes sense, very well paced in most areas, really good acting, especially from Eccleston. There's no mistake about it. He slips in very well, and you can tell it's not written by RTD. It's not under his guidance, but that doesn't make it bad in any way. It's just you can tell it's not Russell T Davies' Doctor Who. You can tell in terms of just the little bits of dialogue, the little things he says. While still good,
it is the
obviously if you're expecting the same sort of thing, you're going to be disappointed in some aspects, but you shouldn't really expect it, I think.
Well, this is a sort of I call it like a chirpy brand of New Who Big Finish that you get. It's not just this box set. This happens a lot. Like this was the same with the 10th Doctor Avengers. It's the same with some of the 8th Doctor New Who Big Finish content. It's the same thing with some of the War Doctor stuff. Even the fact that it's in the fucking Time War, there's still this sort of chirpy energy to it. And I'm not 100% sure what the reason is for this, whether it's just the writing style or whether it's the marketability of it. But I do think that there are some very distinct differences in characterization. I think the biggest difference between the Ninth Doctor on TV and the Ninth Doctor in Big Finish is probably the comedy. Because the comedy on TV is quite sour and it's quite dry. And it's quite biting. Yeah. And I love that. Whereas in Big Finish, it's a bit more wholesome. Like, it's a bit more chirpy and a bit more sort of I would say it's almost like
I'd say like streamlined in a sense.
It feels
it's a lot more
a lot of his
comedy.
like his jokes are still technically in character, but they feel more like a sort of uncle giving you a knuckle to the head, like a little scruff, but like it's very it's very family friendly. Like there's one specific bit in Food Fight where he calls Nova a nerd, and that's not.
I wasn't a fan of that. I think that for me went a bit far. It's a bit cringy, really, but it's nah. Wasn't a fan of. I wasn't a fan of the whole ending in general in terms of that final scene in some aspects, but especially that.
Some of the jokes in this were good, but some of them felt a very they were very chirpy and flat, and also I do think that some of the quips that he was given in terms of the way it was written, and actually, to be fair, partly performance too, it felt a lot like other Doctors to me. There was a lot of them that felt like more recent New Who Doctors in terms of his eccentricity. It was a lot more upbeat and a lot more optimistic rather than the sort of, oh, you're a stupid ape, that we got on TV.
Yeah.
And also there was a couple of little lines that reminded me of other Doctors. Like he gave a couple of Peter Davison lines actually when he was saying like, sorry, mustache. So there was a very sort of chirpy-ish, much more upbeat characterization to his Doctor in terms of the comedy, which sometimes was a bit grating, but other times it worked really well. It just sort of depended on the scene. But apart from that, when it got serious, he was great. He was excellent when it got serious. And
I totally agree. Yeah.
And also listening to this box set reminded me of how good he is with like the tech stuff, like talking about like the sci-fi jargon. He's so good at breaking down a plot that sounds complicated, but in a way that makes you understand it. Part of that is the writing, part of that's the performance, but he did it on TV as well. Christopher Eccleston just has a way of making exposition sound interesting, and it's because he has this sort of not only a relatable charm and energy, but also because the dialogue is written in a way where it's not dumbed down, but it sort of lifts you up to the story, if you know what I mean. It's like it's like he's up here putting a hand down to you and saying to you, come on, reach here, and I will tell you what's happening, which I think is a fundamentally good storytelling thing to do. It's something that I think more modern, art forms need to do, because a lot of art these days tends to pander and spoon feed the audience with easy information, which makes it so much less interesting to me and so much less dynamic, and it doesn't feel like an actual character motivational choice or even just an intelligent, bit of writing. It's just pandering, whereas what they do with the Ninth Doctor on TV and even in this Big Finish box set is use his intelligence and have him guide an audience into what he sees and what he understands, and makes the very complex plot easy to get. And I think that's part of the marketability that's done really well with Substance, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think just the natural dialogue, I think it's perfectly surfaceable. It's decent stuff. It never feels bogged down in just like over complication in terms of how is it trying to explain its plot. It never beats you over the head too hard. I think it's just perfectly surfaceable.
But yes, I do think that Christopher Eccleston, came back with something to prove. He really did. Obviously, his performance is slightly different to what it was on TV. Like I said, there are things that he has changed about the way he acts in the story, and I know that he wanted to do that, but there are differences. But it's still strong acting, if you know what I mean. It's still the same strong actor that was still there 16 years ago, and I think that is something that I do have to give credit for, is I think his performance is very good. The only thing about Big Finish is I wish I could actually see him, because the way he sounds in the audio, it sounds like he's doing a lot of movement, and I kind of wish I could see him actually moving around. And that's one of the only things with Big Finish sometimes, is that the audio is so enticing that I just want it to be on TV, if you know what I mean. Obviously that's not possible for reasons, but sometimes it can be quite tantalizing. But I thought Christopher Eccleston's performance was really good, and his characterization, whilst there's a few cringy moments, on the whole was solid.
Yeah, it definitely was. It was definitely, I think when he was at his best was the quiet moments, was this little moment. I think especially with like Audrey, and especially think at the very beginning with the Romans and all that whole scene. Those little quiet moments, I think, are like, yeah, that's 9 at his best, I would say.
Oh yeah,
I think it's just nice and simple. It allows the performance to breathe. You really get a sense of the sort of mindset of the Doctor at that point in time. It's really good stuff. Yeah, and I always enjoy this very quiet moments with 9 especially.
Yeah, I think one specific scene where he really shines is it's the scene, but obviously not the comedic bits that come after, but the scene where in Food Fight where he goes back in time and finds Nova before she even met him. He's really, really good in that scene when he's explaining things to her he already knows. And that scene, if it was done not very well, could have come across really bad, because she is accusing him of being quite creepy because he's spying on her and all that, and that's kind of what she thinks he's doing. And that if it was executed the wrong way, it could come off as really bad, because it would just be him coming off like a stalker. But the way that Christopher Eccleston delivers those lines is so genuine that he convinces you with, no, actually, Nova, you need to understand that the reason why I know this is because you told me. And part of it is his performance, but part of it's the way the dialogue's written, is that there's so much sincerity to his words that it gets away with it, and it kind of shows an example of how you can do a scene where someone who's a time traveler proves that they've met someone before and come across as genuine. And I was very impressed by that scene. I think it was one of the best in the whole set.
Yeah, I was definitely in the same boat.
Yeah,
I was very impressed by it, because that this kind of plot, it could very easily have fallen apart in terms of how all the logistics work, because afterwards a time travel idea, all of it is like, in some areas it could be all over the place, but I think it is relatively straightforward. I think even if it gets a bit confusing, I think it gets to a point where, okay, all right, no. I understand what's going on there. Yeah,
well, the good thing is that Nicholas Briggs, who wrote the stories, he's actually played with this concept before and done really well. One of my absolute favourite Fifth Doctor stories, and probably my favourite Fifth Doctor Big Finish story I've heard, in terms of overall, probably, I would even say it's maybe my second favourite story just behind Caves of Androzani, is a story called Creatures of Beauty, which is written by Nicholas Briggs, and it's by far the best thing he's ever written that I've heard. And he uses this concept of things being told out of order, except in that case, it's actually even more complex, because rather than having the Doctor's point of view and the character's point of view in general just guiding you through all the different time loops and zones and all that, it instead leaves you, the audience, not knowing whose point of view it is, like what point in time it is, and not taking a point of view, and being given different bits of the story in the wrong order, and then putting all the pieces of the puzzle together in the final episode, and then having plot twists that result as of not knowing certain information. So Nicholas Briggs has experience in doing this before, and has experience doing it extremely well before. So when I heard that this was quite a bit of a time-jumping story, and it was written by Nick Briggs, I had confidence that he would do well, because he's done it before. Now, I don't think this is on anywhere near the level of Creatures of Beauty, but I do think that, considering his experience doing this sort of thing before, is probably why the execution works, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I get you. I would say, from obviously what you just explained to me, yeah, it would make sense for him to be at least competent in this sort of like field of ideas. Yeah,
I recommend anyone go ahead and listen to the Fifth Doctor and Nissa stories from the first 50 main range, especially Spare Parts and Creatures of Beauty. Those ones are excellent. Amazing stories. Anyway, moving on from that. But yeah, I thought on the whole the character was really good, and also we kind of touched on the whole concept of the box set as well, in the sense of but I suppose we'll get into detail when we get to like the actual plot. I suppose we should maybe move on to some of the other characters. The sort of, I suppose you could say, the main companion of this set is Nova. She's interesting because her story is told out of order, and I think in some senses one of the reasons why I would agree with you that Sphere of Freedom is the weakest episode of this set is because the way it's told works really well for the plot, but it doesn't work very well for introducing her character. It's very jumbled, and I think it creates this weird unfamiliarity to her, and it takes, I think, a few scenes for her character to actually connect once we actually have her and the Doctor together traveling, as opposed to just her timeline being jumbled at the start. And I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that the first episode makes, if you know what I mean. Is that it expects us to be introduced to a new character and have this jumbled timeline as well. I think that if Nova was introduced in a story before this one, and we knew who she was going into this plot, I think it would have worked a bit less messier. But on the whole, I think she's an interesting character. I do think that she's a little bit of a homogenization of other companions that have come before. There's bits of Bill Potts in there, with her being a fan of sci-fi and all that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now that you say that, she has a lot of similarities to, I think, Bill Potts especially. There's a lot of similarities there. Now that you've mentioned that. Yeah,
and in fact, even the actress's voice has some similar nuances actually to Pearl Mackey's, which I caught on to as well. But specifically talking about the character, she has some similarities to Bill Potts. They're not exactly the same, but I do think that Nova is, and also I think you could even say that she's kind of similar to Osgood in some senses, maybe just at surface level. But I would say more so Bill Potts than Osgood. But I do think there is. I wouldn't say she's the most original idea of a character.
No, I don't think she is. But when I first listened to especially Sphere of Freedom, one thing that was really just nice to see, they actually did give her more character than Ryan and Yaz, for example. It was so refreshing to have just a simple character. We know who they are, what motivates them, especially in this story where she's pretty much only known this life for all her life. It was just nice to have just something of a character, and that be presented throughout pretty much all of the story whenever she was in a scene.
I will say though, she is absolutely a far cry from some of the other Big Finish companions. Like, she's not anywhere near as good as
I wouldn't imagine so.
She's not anywhere near as good as Charlie Pollard or Evelyn Smythe or Rejoice. She's not as good as Lucy Miller. Like, there's a bunch of Big Finish companions that I would even say she's not even as good as Kira is. But for what we got so far, I think she's okay. I think she's likable. I like the sort of, the bit, we got a bit of backstory about her parents passing away. Again, not particularly original, but the moment where it's revealed is interesting. Again, I don't have a lot to say about her other than I think she's good enough. She has some character traits that are interesting. There are some good bits of banter between her and the Doctor, some that are a little bit cringe, and the actress does a fine job. I just wish that her introduction was less jumbled.
I would mostly agree with that.
A lot of her interaction in this story is actually plot-based anyway. I suppose you could say the main villain of this story is Audrey, who is the CEO of whatever the games company is called. Audrey, I would say, is probably the main sort of humanoid villain. Obviously, you have the Time Eddies and the Ravagers themselves, but talking about actual speaking roles, I think Audrey, you could say, is the main villain, and I think she has a very interesting reveal, I guess you could say, because throughout Sphere of Freedom, and this is probably the one thing that I think is probably the strongest thing about Sphere of Freedom, is that throughout the story, we see that somewhere in the future, her and the Doctor are having a conversation about what happened, and then it's revealed at the end of the episode that she was actually behind the games itself, and that's a really cool twist. I think she's probably the one thing about Sphere of Freedom that I really like, because apart from that, I personally think it's a bit weak. Like, it's not bad, but it's just a bit bog standard.
I enjoyed their interactions a lot during Sphere of Freedom.
Yeah.
The dialogue back and forth was really good.
Yeah, but it's once we get the twist, and then you get Cataclysm and Food Fight, that her character becomes really interesting to me. In fact, I would say the whole box set gets interesting after Sphere of Freedom, really. Because I think Sphere of Freedom is basically, here's what I think of the first episode, is that I don't think Nick Briggs did a particularly good job at hitting the ground running. I think as a self-contained episode, it's quite bland. But the concepts that are introduced in it, and especially the setup it does for the next two episodes, is what saves it and what lifts it up for me. And also, obviously, the performances. But mainly talking about the plot, I think it's the things that are introduced in this that set up the next ones that really lift it up for me. The long-term effect that this episode has is positive. It's just, I think as a self-contained episode, it's not the best. Would you agree with this?
Yeah, I would say so. I think in terms of what it's trying to achieve, I think it does it very well in terms of setting up the plot and making sure all the pieces are put in place for the rest of the story to function. And I think there was a lot to enjoy about it. I think it definitely is the weakest. I think in terms of how it's sort of structured as well. But I think it is just a nice little story. Well, self-contained little bit for this overall story.
Talking about Chris Eccleston, it's a bit like how, if you look at the Satellite 5 stories in Series 1, like The Long Game is by no means a bad episode. In fact, I'd even say it's a good episode. But as a self-contained story, it's just decent. But where it's so strong is how it ages once you get to Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways. And all of the things that it does to set up that finale is amazing. And I feel like Sphere of Freedom is a little bit like that. It's in the sense of comparing the two. I do think actually, to be honest, I prefer The Long Game over Sphere of Freedom anyway. But what I mean is that the strongest thing about Sphere of Freedom, a bit like The Long Game, is how it sets up the next two episodes that are part of its arc. If you get what I'm saying. And then as a self-contained story, it's not the best. But I also think that possibly it can get away with that because it's the first one with Chris Eccleston in it. And sort of the focus is more around the fact that he's back. I just personally think I would have liked more of an interesting self-contained story to go along with setting up the rest of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree.
But having said that, it's not bad in the slightest, and I don't blame Briggs for it. I think it's just the weakest one. It is an interesting setup because you're introduced to this sort of, it's an empire, and obviously it's a games empire, so it's sort of futuristic technology sort of thing, but because it's a games empire and the motivations behind it get revealed eventually, it does have a really interesting sort of political theme undercurrenting it, and it's something that's very similar to the Ninth Doctor's character, and also I like how it's a bit similar to some of his stories. It's tackling media in some sense rather than television. Obviously it's interactive, VR. In fact, in the future it's almost completely 100% real VR in this context. But I like how it's using that to also, it's also blending into this whole sort of narrative of the actual empire of the business itself and why it runs and what's in it. And I like when we get to, I think it's either the second or third episode, I think it might be the second one, we find out that, when the Doctor asks Audrey, well, you're obviously not in this for the money because you probably think you're richer than God, so why are you doing it? I think that's a really interesting twist because it means that her as a villain is she's not just greedy and hungry for money. there are more motives than that, and I think that adds an interesting twist to her
There's a
character.
deeper layer there for her character, for her motivation.
Yeah, and I
So,
think it's an interesting take because it puts a different spin on the commentary that's going for, in the sense of when you've got business, corporation, like people in CEOs of a business or corporation, it kind of targets a thing of, well, not every motivation for being, this authoritative power over society and selling this product that ruins people's lives and gets you power or money. It's not all about money. And also asking, well, what are the other motives? And this is something that the story explores. It explores her other motives, and it does a much more interesting, alternative way of looking at it. I think that's one thing about the set that I do really like, is that it takes an alternative look at why someone running a business would want to sell this product, desperately.
Yeah.
So I really like that. I definitely think Cataclysm is a step up from Sphere of Freedom. There's two main reasons for this. The first reason is it's a big turning point for the story because it starts introducing I guess you could say, the timey-wimey elements. We start seeing time becoming a bit out of order. It's not like messy, but we see things happening, darting around because of what has happened in the plot with the time eddies and the Ravagers. And I think that is really interesting. And also, this story does a really interesting commentary on perspective and how people will make decisions based on what they understand. And so I have just re-listened to this today, and I can't exactly remember if it happens in this episode or if it's in Food Fight. But one thing I really liked was how Audrey thought she had told the doctor about the pheromones, but she hadn't told the doctor that was with her in the scene where he thought he had resolved the plot. And therefore, because his perspective was less than what she expected, he didn't understand that there was going to be a side effect to doing what he was doing. And so he had to then come up with a new plan to try and fix what the new problem was. I really liked that because it showed how time means a lot in terms of your decision making, and it shows that the doctor at all stages of time will make an educated decision based on the information he knows. But if the information that he knows is not the same information that the other person thinks he knows, then he will make a decision that's not fully constructed. I thought that was really, really good.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was some really good stuff there during that. I really loved that.
Yeah.
It's just like, it was like it made it seem like it wasn't. It was very complicated. Like, characters are just so interesting. I just love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I love the way that Briggs used the sort of displacement of time to try and, clash the POVs in the sense that everyone in the scene had seen and heard different things from each other in different points in time, and admit their plan was messy and they couldn't figure out who had said what and who, if they had said this to them in that time period. It was a very interesting way of telling the story. The other thing that I loved about Cataclysm, the one hilarious scene, was when the Doctor and Nova got locked in a cell, and how he escaped. And just like in Boomtown, the Ninth Doctor, being his tongue-in-cheek bisexual way, flirted with the jail guard and got out.
I said this on. I was saying this on the Ecom Discord. I was like saying, what is it with Knight and just gay people being so attracted to him? It's great.
Yeah,
it's always funny. It's always hilarious.
The thing I love about the Ninth Doctor's sexuality is it's so tongue-in-cheek, and you don't actually know if he's being serious or not. I think that's great, but leaving it up to interpretation, because it's not really our business anyway. It's kind of his privacy. But the thing is that I don't actually know if he's genuinely interested in that guy or not, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite scenes. That was actually one of the comedic scenes that was brilliant.
I think for me that was the funniest scene in the whole box set.
Yeah,
for me.
Yeah, and the actors,
really good stuff.
The actors really sold it, especially Eccleston. He just made it so funny. He's a very funny man.
Yeah. He is.
When you give him really good material, he can be really funny. I think Boomtown is probably the biggest example of that, because his comedy had peaked by then, because it was the last one that he shot, and he'd finally fully figured out how to be funny as the Doctor. I love Boomtown. But yeah, I haven't let you talk much. Do you have much to say about Cataclysm? I know you've written notes down, haven't you?
Some notes. I really enjoy Cataclysm. I think, especially just sort of like we mentioned, I think that part is where I think Nova and Nine's sort of relationship really, I think that's where it gets a bit stronger. I think the interactions they have, especially what we just mentioned in jail with the guard. I think that sort of, especially with Nova, that sort of like interaction there, I think that really did humanize them and really give their relationship a nice little layer to it, and it was just really, really nice. I really enjoy Cataclysm. It was definitely a step up from Sphere of Freedom, I think. How we got the plot going, how things were starting to sort of trickle in was really nice. I really liked how it did that. Yeah, I think there's another. It was a step up, but still just very, very solid. Yeah, solid parts of the story.
It was almost a transitional episode as well. It was sort of a. It was raising the stakes. I think, actually, if there's one thing I will say that I'm not too sure on about Cataclysm, is that they added universe-ending stakes to the story, and I'm not sure if it earned them 100%. Like, obviously,
I'm not sure it did, yeah.
Like, in terms of plot logic, yes, the plot was functional, but I feel like it may have been too soon. Like, in terms of pacing, it was a very, very sudden jump to the universe has ended. And they almost did the scene, you know the scene in Pyramids of Mars, because I know you've seen that story now, where the Doctor shows Sarah the scene of Earth crumbling, except obviously in that context, that scene is really well done. But in the context of this story, where Nova saw the universe end and then they travelled back in time to try and fix it, I feel like it was just a bit too over the top, and it didn't, to me anyway, it didn't come across as completely and utterly earned, and it just felt like maybe it was a step too far, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, because I don't think that is how the story has been presenting this story.
And I don't think
that's really been in line with what this story has been so far.
I don't think Sphere of Freedom gave enough build-up to earn that moment.
No.
And it was also...
Because with Sphere of Freedom...
Yeah, go ahead.
It was very much because the very start is quite significantly into the plot already, it had to do a lot of, because of how it was structured, a lot of establishment through the flashbacks and all that, and I think they were mostly fine. I think just the structuring was a bit meh for me, and I think doing that, I think it maybe couldn't really get the grasp of this proper stakes, and then with this, putting like the worldwide universe-ending stakes, I think was okay. I don't think you really have been building up to that kind of level of threat. I wish you kind of did that a bit more with Sphere of Freedom, I think.
Yeah, and like...
I definitely remember thinking that.
It's not to say that you can't do this in a self-contained story, because you can.
No.
But I just feel like this would have been the kind of thing that would have been fitting of, like, you know, the fourth box set rather than the first one.
Yeah, in that way, yeah. I think building up to this kind of plot, I think, in terms of a plot that is quite big, it's a very monumental story, I think, would be more beneficial to really have these sort of small self-contained stories that are very, in most ways, character-driven. We get a real sense of, in this point in time, especially with Nine, what he's kind of like. 'Cause we know overall what Nine is like. I do want more in future box sets, a more, where is he right now in terms of his like motivations or mindset. I would like more of that stuff, and I think that being applied to the stakes, I think, would be very interesting going forward.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, in terms of because one thing I have actually wondered in terms of canon is that where does this actually fit in? Because
that's one of my biggest issues.
Because
I think,
and the only
that,
reason why I say that is because there's that one scene in Rose where he looks in the mirror for the first time, and I feel like it's quite hard to believe that he wouldn't have looked at a mirror before
Yeah.
that. If there's like thousands of Big Finish before that.
It's the only thing I could see this that it does legitimately line up is the fact that when at the end of Rose he goes off, then comes back, and that because it's a time machine, he can literally go for as long as he needs to.
Also, there's one of the.
that
It's
to
not.
work.
It's also not just the end. It's also after the mirror scene, they go down to the park, and then he materializes away. There's also that bit as well. It's possible that he may.
I would feel like
gone
though,
off during that, though.
him going away during that plot though, I don't think would work for his character. I think he wouldn't just go off and have another adventure while he's still trying to figure out everything with the autons and the nesting conscience. I don't think that would really work.
Because the thing is that the weird thing is that people keep saying that this is meant to be like a younger version of 9. And I think, and I'm just thinking, because he looks at himself in the mirror for the first time in that episode, I don't believe that.
It's very recent. It's still recent.
Yeah.
I think people got to remember that even if, and I've said this many times, whether most of Big Finish is canon or not, even if it isn't, I would still prefer it to at the very least line up. Make sure it still functions with the whole Ninth Doctor life. Here's this regeneration, because then it makes the stories, even if they're not canon, it still makes them lived in. It still makes them feel important. Because then if they're not, then it's just okay. Is this just a story we want to do? Fine.
I do think that gap though that you're talking about, the end of Rose, that would make sense, because also talking about the TV story, that is the only, probably, unless I'm completely wrong on this, I believe that is the only possible time he could have been in those photos that Clive showed her. So I do think he goes away and does those, has those photos taken and says, also I could travel in time. And he has those photos taken and make sure that Clive can see them.
And that's a big possibility, yeah.
Yeah. And my theory is that he does that so that Clive shows her those photos so that she knows he can travel in time because she's seen photos of him doing it.
Or just someone who is going to pick up on this kind of stuff. Yeah. Someone who's going to notice all this because he's doing it very deliberately. I would hope that is what... And I think that's probably what Russell probably went for, but I don't think a lot of people would notice that.
Well, no, because
I just want this story, and I want future box sets to try and lean into the fact that this is very recent for the 9. It's around that time.
Well,
and then it makes the story a bit more believable and more.
There is one thing though that they did do in terms of canon that I thought was really good. Is that whenever they brought up the Time Lords, because this story has a tie to the Time Lords, that's more to do with Food Fight. But they do bring it up a few times, and they don't go deep into it. But when they do bring it up, he very, very briefly brushes it off with a few words. And I thought that was really well done. Firstly, because in this box set, they don't intend to delve into that angst yet. So they don't want to spend too much time on it. Otherwise, it'll naturally, you'd think that it would end up with a lot of clashing, drama that's not needed. But secondly, they also didn't ignore it. So by acknowledging it, it shows that it is still the Ninth Doctor post-Time War, just come off that. But he's brushing it aside because he doesn't want to talk about it, which I think is really well done. And I suppose we are kind of getting into Food Fight now, which is the third part, because I want to talk about this. I really like the twist that the Time Lords were responsible for these games. And the fact that the Doctor's the only one that has the ability to be able to try and fix it because he's the only Time Lord left.
Yeah.
I thought that was excellent.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really nice.
It helped explain how this human colony with these games was able to create something so dangerous with time, is because the Time Lords were part of making it. I think that is great. I also think, and I'm not.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not sure if you'll agree with this or not. I think Food Fight is the best of the set.
I think Food Fight is the best. Yeah. I think my only real issue with it is just the last scene in some aspects. In terms of
the comedy.
I think everything else, I think, is pretty good.
Yeah.
I think.
Now, I will say Foo Fight is the most experimental of the three. It is the one with the most messed up time.
Yeah.
So some people might find that a bit jarring, but I've listened to it twice. It's not the easiest thing to understand, but I think I got it, and I did like it. And this was because when I first listened to the box set, I wasn't too enthused by Spare Freedom, and then with Cataclysm, I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. But this is the one where I was like, oh, actually, no, this is why I wanted to listen to Ninth Doctor Big Finish. And then re-listening to it again, in hindsight, I saw the things that set up for Food Fight in the first two, and I really appreciated the sort of the story as a whole and what it was going for. I still don't think Food Fight is amazing. It's not like a classic or anything, but I think it's the best of the three because it utilizes all of the things that were built up in the first two and gives us a satisfying conclusion to a quite an ambitious box set in terms of the storytelling.
Yeah, I really, really enjoy the idea of the Ninth Doctor being like in this whole box set. Like, in the scenes with Audrey, he's like this ghostly figure in a way. It's just like I think the way they did that, especially through the performance as well, I've really enjoyed those scenes.
I also,
like I mentioned earlier,
I really like how he goes back in time to try it, and it's sort of something that you see in something like Genesis of the Daleks. It's something that we see in Seasons of Fair, which is an Eighth Doctor story. It's all across the Doctor Who. It's kind of a thing that pops up every now and then because it's such a great device for time travel storytelling. But the fact that he ends up in a place before Audrey had even made the games yet, but then he has no choice but to let events happen, and I really liked that. I really liked he's sort of almost like a ghost in the future talking to her. And then also we get, certain things that were out of order in the first two episodes. We see them linked up in the third one, which was really satisfying. Seeing scenes where we see the in-between of all the different time cuts that we didn't get before. That was really satisfying. That's something that Nick Briggs did in Creatures of Beauty as well. He's got this really good way of tying it all together, which I think is quite impressive, the fact that he would have had to map out this whole story, all the events in the story, and have to remember all of the different things that the audience has to eventually learn, and then plan out when to tell them for the most effective way of learning information and having the right twists happen, but also have a continuity of events. I think that was really impressive. I think he did a really good job of managing all of that continuity, which is, I have to say hats off for that. Probably my favourite scene of the story is when he goes back to the time before Nova had even met him and tells her everything that he already knows about her because he's already had an adventure with her. And like I said, the comedic bit that comes after is cringe, but I also really like do you want to come with me and travel in the TARDIS because I already know where you want to go. I think that's such an interesting way of him inviting a person on.
That's who the Doctor is. Because I hate it in Series 11 where the Doctor was fucking nervous about asking the fam to come with her on adventures. Because that's not what the Doctor does. The Doctor's a very confident person in terms of, you want to go on adventures, I can tell. So let's go and do it because it's fun. It's great. I just like those scenes especially. And I think they do a very decent job with that concept here with Nova.
There's one scene in Food Fight where I have slightly mixed feelings on the execution. It's the scene where he finally gets back into his TARDIS, because obviously they lose the TARDIS and they have to use time eddies to travel in time.
Yeah.
And they jump time tracks because the TARDIS obviously filters this out for safety, but the time eddies aren't like that, and so they end up jumbled all across time. But when he finally gets back in his TARDIS, the good thing about it is it's a really satisfying scene for him to finally be back in there and have control of time again. But unfortunately, the only thing I have to say about it is I just think the delivery is just slightly out of character. It needs
him saying he's back in the TARDIS.
I'm back! Fantastic! Like, it's just
that
it's
felt
just too
very
loud.
Because they used that for the initial, I think, reveal trailer.
Yeah.
It felt very trailerish, and I'm like, I can tell what this is, and it's fine, but it's him. I think him. Yeah, it wasn't. It could have been better. I think. I think a little bit of a
just
rewrite of
doesn't.
the dialogue.
it just doesn't feel like the Ninth Doctor to me. To me, the Ninth Doctor would say something a bit more. It's not. He's not that like loud, and he gets excited, but it's very sort of. It's more tongue in cheek.
He gets
than
excited
that,
by like technology and history. He gets like for Charles Dickens, for example. He's like that, but it makes sense because he's meeting Charles Dickens for the first time, and he's a massive fan of his work due to knowing
like
pretty much all of his work.
Because like if you think about scenes on TV where he's excited that I really like, you think about the scene in Aliens of London when the ship finally crashes into Big Ben and everyone's in a panic.
Because it's monumental change in history.
Monumental change in history, and then obviously the iconic dance scene and the Doctor dances at the end. Those are really well handled, but there is a tongue-in-cheek factor to it. It's something that Russell T Davies incorporated into the character because it was something.
The Ninth Doctor is practically giddy in those moments,
and it's that same tongue-in-cheek style humor that the classic Doctors had, especially people like Tom Baker and Patrick Troughton and even John Pertwee. They have this really sort of. Obviously, they are really excited, but then they're going to downplay it a little bit and play around with it. And I really liked that about the Ninth Doctor, the way that he's sort of just... He's quietly charming when he's excited. And I would have preferred if the scene was handled a bit more like that. Like something like... Finally back in my TARDIS, about time. Like something like that. That's the kind of thing I would expect him to say.
Yeah.
And he would just cheerfully say, "Fantastic." Like I don't see him as the kind of character that goes completely over the moon for it. And it was a bit too flat and a bit less of what I really like about the character. It's not a bad scene, but these are just small little nuances in the writing of the Ninth Doctor that I'm noticing that don't quite line up with how he's portrayed on TV. And I guarantee if, say for example, if Russell T Davies was the script editor, he would have fine-tuned those scenes to be different to what they are, because they don't quite have the same charm. I felt like, that scene that the Ninth Doctor had there is something that, I don't know, bloody Jodie Whittaker's Doctor would do. Or maybe even in some contexts, it would maybe Matt Smith's Doctor would do. It's not something that the Ninth Doctor would do, and it didn't feel in character for me. But it's not a bad scene because it is really good. It's a really good scene in terms of plot, though, in terms of building up to him finally getting back to the TARDIS. So I'm in two minds about it. There is work to be done. There is some flaws in this characterization and some of the bits of the story. And I hope in the next box set they reevaluate some of this and they sort of fine tune it a bit and we get more of, more accurate portrayal of this character. But on the whole...
Yeah, they need to make it more in line with the TV counterpart. Because I think trying to just sort of... I think stripping away is a bit of a strong term, but I think there's little bits of the Ninth Doctor that, like I mentioned at the beginning, you can tell it's not written by Russell T Davies. You can tell it's not under his guidance. And I don't think that's a problem, but you can't then just not have the same sort of aneurysms of him, the little things he does, I think. And I think in most scenes, he's good, but there's little moments that you can tell there's something different.
There needs to be more
but it doesn't make sense for it to be different.
There needs to be more of a sarcastic edge. That's what's missing.
Yeah.
You think about scenes like in The Empty Child where he's just like, what you're saying about my nose? What you're saying about my ears? And like that sort of thing, and like watch it, and then don't touch the baby. Like
don't touch the baby.
He has this way of friendly insults that he does, and they are biting, but they aren't ruthless. They're not like savage beatings, but he has these little moments where he gives you a bit of an insulting joke, but it's all banter, and that was what made his character so distinct to me. Is I loved the little jabs he would do and the little friendly, harsh insults he would do. And in this, he was just a bit too PG. He was a bit too babyface, if you know what I mean. And I think that's what was missing. It felt like they were almost watering him down a little bit, and that was a bit disappointing. I wish he was a bit sharper. But, you know, hopefully they'll fix this in the next one. Oh, there was also one other thing in Food Fighter I thought was really funny, because there was a reference to the Unquiet Dead when he talked about, and even though technically in canon this takes place before it, but he talks about, well, what are you going to ask me how many sugars I want in my tea? I thought immediately of Jake. I thought immediately of Jake.
Yeah, same. I thought the exact same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. If he ever comes back to the channel, I'm going to tell him that in the Ninth Doctor Big Finish box sets, they reference the 2 sugars.
Yep. Nick Briggs watches fucking
Genesis Adventures Army.
He watches it.
Oh dear. But yeah, it's I thought Food Fight was very solid, with a few things holding it back from being like really, really, really strong. But yeah, I would say it's probably the best of the box set for me. And satisfyingly concluded a story in a way that was earned. Like, wow, I've missed this. I've missed when the end of the story is actually good and makes sense. Like, how often do you get that now? Like, with the current show, where the final act in the story is actually the best part rather than the worst.
It's just rare now. It's rare that the conclusion is actually quite satisfying and makes it's well rounded and it makes sense.
Very in character for the Ninth Doctor's era. Because you think about his stories, the conclusions were almost always great. Like, especially when you think about the 2-parters, like World War III, Doctor Dances, and Parting of the Ways all have very satisfying conclusions. And I've missed this. I have missed this.
Yeah. I said this to you when I was listening to it. It was just like, man, isn't it nice to have a Doctor like that you know very well and you love? It's just good. It's just good and it's nice to watch and listen to. You know, man. Doctor used to be so cool.
Or you know what's the funny thing is that like these 3 episodes are some of my least favorite Christopher Eccleston stories, but it's still fun
and it's still interesting.
But it's still miles better than a lot of the stuff we've gotten on TV recently.
I would say this is better than pretty much like 80% of the Chibnall era.
Oh yeah, I reckon.
Like, I think the only thing that's better than this is probably like Haunting. I think.
Yeah, Haunting, and that's about it, really.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Oh dear, what a funny show. But yeah, no. This was not perfect, but solid. Reminded me of what good Doctor Who was like.
Yeah, it really did. Good modern Doctor Who.
Although I will say, in terms of Big Finish, it's not the best. There's a lot more Big Finish that I think.
I would imagine it is.
Big Finish is a big catalogue, and the best of it is miles better than this. Like, it's
like, even with me not being that experienced with listening to a lot of Big Finish, like for example, Out of Time, I would say is better than this. As an example of a story that I've listened to.
Oh, I think the characterization is better. I don't think the plot's better.
I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the characterization carries Out of Time, but the plot was a bit rough.
Yeah, I would say so. But I think in overall, I think Out of Time is better. But I think the benefit that Ravagers has is the allowance of the amount of time it has to tell its story and how it wants to present it to us.
Yeah,
and I think it does it competently well.
Yeah, I think the best. I mean, it's such a cliche to say it, but the best Big Finish stories that I've heard, almost all of them have the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Doctors in them, because those are the ones that got like, you know,
because with them, they're the Doctors where in their time they didn't get really the sort of writing that they really deserved.
Some of the time they did,
like most aspects.
Some of the time they did.
Some they did. Not 5 did for sure. Like for example, Earthshock.
7 did. 7 did in season 25 and 26. 8 didn't because he didn't even get writing at all apart from the TV movie.
He didn't. He got a movie.
Yeah. And then the 6th Doctor, like, you know, a lot of fun on TV, but what they gave him in Big Finish was so much better. Like in
exactly. Because they're the ones that really put the real heart and soul in, because they're the ones that didn't get the sort of treatment that 1, 2, 3, and 4 got.
Whereas it's with Eccleston and Tennant and Tom Baker, it's actually the opposite, where their Big Finish is weaker than their TV stories. That doesn't necessarily mean that their Big Finish is bad, but well, actually, to be fair, Destination Nova is a pile of shit, but we won't talk about that. That was the first Tom Baker Adventures Big Finish. That is a fucking train wreck, and that's written by Nick Briggs, which was really surprising. The Tom Baker, Chris Eccleston, and David Tennant Big Finish is actually weaker than their TV stuff, and part of that is to do with the fact that their TV stuff is just the best. You know, it's the cream of the crop. Whereas with the other ones, the 80s Doctors and Paul McGann, they had something to prove, and Jesus Christ, they proved it sometimes. Oh my god. Especially Colin Baker and Paul McGann, their Big Finish content is just off the wall, man. It's some of the best Doctor Who ever, I think. I'll be very interested, actually, to see what happens when they snatch up Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi. I'm very interested to see how they handle them.
Matt is what I'm really interested in, what they're going to do with it, because I've obviously made it very well known in the last couple of months that I think Series 5 is him at his best, but then when it gets to Series 6 and 7, it falls apart so quickly. And it's really sad, because we know he's a great actor, and I want him in really good stuff. So when he does do Big Finish stuff, I'll be first there to listen to it and be like, come on, I want some real meaty stuff for 11 to have.
I want that like evolved version of his Doctor we got in The Girl Who Waited and The God Complex, that really mature, like sort of they took the groundwork of what they did in the first series, and they added this really like mature edge to him, and his performance was so confident and swinging.
Yep.
And we only got it for like those 2 episodes, and maybe The Doctor's Wife. Maybe, I suppose Doctor's Wife's a bit more whimsical. But those 2 episodes really showed the 11th Doctor that I always wanted. And I wish we got more of that. I hope we do. Yeah. I hope that is the 11th Doctor we get in Big Finish. Although I'm a bit worried, because I don't know if I'm not sure if we'll actually... It's hard to say, because both Karen Gillan and Jenna Coleman are very busy at the moment. So it may be an issue. We might have to get him in one of those like periods where he's not traveling with them. Like it's sort of solo adventures.
That would be hard. That would be like in between the
6 and 7
Series A. Yes. Or I would say after Amy Marie gets taken, and it's before the Christmas special,
before the Snowman. Yeah, you could also have it...
That would be a good area to explore.
You could also have it be between Series 6 and 7 as well, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, but...
Since, I think, because with Series 6 and 7, as it went on, they implied the sort of story of them being quite separated at times. Because I think...
I know that Matt Smith wants to do more work with Jenna Coleman, but I'm concerned because, you know what we think.
If they did box sets of them being good characters, I'd be all for it. And it would actually help Series 7. It's still incredibly shit, but it would at least, with Big Finish, it would actually characterize Jenna Coleman's character.
Yeah, in terms of Peter Capaldi, I want more just Series 10 stories with Bill. That's what I want.
Yeah.
I'd
be just fine with that.
You can very easily do it too. There's not like any real sort of storyline issues you have to really deal with, because a lot of them are quite self-contained.
They just go on adventures.
Yeah. If you want Nardole in there, sure, throw him in there. I don't really care. But I think the 12th Doctor and Bill would be a really good one to do. The other one that they might do, I'm not 100% sure on this, but they might do him and River Song after Husbands. But I'm not in any hurry to see that.
I don't want them to, because I want that to just be the end of their story.
Yeah, but
I think it's a perfectly fine ending.
Yeah, but I think a natural fit would be 12 and Bill.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely.
There's a natural point at which you can do it, which takes place after Lie of the Land, but before the finale. It's a bit like how in Series 3, if you were to ever do 10 and Martha, you could do it after 42, but before Utopia.
Yeah, there's a lot of room there, for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, we're getting distracted. But yeah, I mean, dream casting on Big Finish is always like a thing that people do. It's just so much unlimited potential. But anyway, so yeah, this was written by Nick Briggs. He's done a billion stories before. Some of them are really good, some of them aren't. He's quite a mixed bag of a writer. I find he's actually at his best when he's being experimental like he is here. And he's at his worst when he's doing fan wank. I hate him when he's doing fan wank. Stuff like the ISOS Network and Destination Nova and Return of the Cybermen and just really mediocre stuff like that is just appalling. Like, it's so just... Oh, man. And a lot of the time, he has these really phoned in, just generic scripts that have a Dalek in it or a Cyberman in it. And I just... It's painful to listen to because I know he can do so much better. But when you get something like Creatures of Beauty, he is absolutely amazing. So I think he's quite a mixed bag of the writer. I think even within this box set, it kind of exposes his flaws and his strengths across the 3 stories. I think in this specific one, I would say it shows that he's not as great here with a self-contained episode. But in terms of a long-term effect, he's good at planning, good at keeping continuity. I think he did a solid job. It could certainly be better, and there's things I would fix, but it also could have been worse. So I would say I think this is an acceptable way to bring Chris Eccleston back. But I'm hoping that it gets better. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree.
The production was by David Richardson. How did you think it sounded? Would you say it was mixed well? I think
the sound design was really good.
Yeah,
from what I heard.
I remember some of the transitions and some of the score in Food Fight was particularly really well done.
I think when it's at its weakest is Sphere Freedom, when I think the little bits that took me out of it were the transitions between the Doctor and then the past. That obviously like the little sound cues they had. It's like, oh, this is we're going back to the backstory music, and then this is we're going back to normal. So it's like, it took me out of it just a bit. I'd rather it just be natural music that transitions it and have it just be different every time, where it's not... Because it feels quite... I don't know what the word would be, but it feels a bit fixed in a sense.
Yeah,
I'd rather it just be natural.
There's other Big Finish stories that do this much better. One specifically is Davros, where Davros is having a conversation with the Doctor talking about his past, and the way it transitions between him talking in his past is really well done, and I wish it was a bit more like that than it was done here. It was a little bit flat here in terms of execution.
Yeah, it definitely felt... That's how I felt. It felt flat.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to describe it.
But
overall, I think the sound design was really good.
Yeah, I thought the atmosphere at the start of Cataclysm was really good. I love it when I can visualize a story in my head, and in fact, there's some of them that are really good. I think the first 2 War Master box sets are some of the best at being able to encapsulate you imagining what the story looks like. This one does it in patches. There's some of it where I can, some of it I'm not so good at being able to imagine it. I do think that the atmosphere in patches was really good, especially at the start of Cataclysm, and I also think the plot twists were really well designed in terms of sound. Like the timing, the dramatic timing of them was done well. And I also think just in general, Food Fight was a very slick production for the most part.
Yeah, I agree.
I do understand that it's a lot harder to pull a lot of this off due to COVID, because everyone has to record a lot of things separate, and that can make things difficult.
This was filmed last year. This was.
Yeah, and I know that that can make things a bit difficult. It's not as easy to coordinate things with all that, so they are on the back foot a bit, but I think they still did a really good job despite that. But yeah, there's a few things I could have improved, but on the whole, I do think the production was well. I thought the score was done well. The only thing I will say is I think the theme that they've given the Ninth Doctor is very generic. Wasn't the biggest fan of it.
Yeah, I think it sounds nice, but it reminds me a lot of Series 5, but just not as good.
Yeah.
It has that sort of like the sort of piano. Like I think it's fine, but I'd rather they. I don't obviously I haven't. Pretty sure they probably can't, but I'd rather they, or at the very least, have remixes of the Ninth Doctor's theme.
Yeah, I don't
at
think.
the very least.
I think the problem is Murray Gold and Silver Screen Records wouldn't allow it. Because they only have, I think they only have rights to the opening theme, and that's it, which is a shame.
Yeah.
But it would have been nice to get some Murray Gold cues in there. Not even the same theme, but just like a
You can just have like choir, a choir, and it would infer that same theme.
I would even accept like some piano or even strings that are recreating the theme, like a rearrangement would have been nice.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I would rather they do that instead of making a brand new theme that is fine, but it doesn't suit his character and it doesn't suit the Ninth Doctor in any way or his era.
Yeah,
I don't think this is more like something that Matt Smith would get.
Yeah,
but it's still even then it could be better anyway. It's
not as good as some of the other themes that they've done for characters. Like the Fourth Doctor got a theme on Big Finish that actually really fits his character quite well. And the War Master theme is perfect. The War Doctor theme is pretty good. But yeah, this one was a bit... didn't feel right.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I have one bit of trivia for this.
Ooh.
Because when I first listened to the story, I went on and listened to the behind the scenes as well.
I'm yet to do that. I'm probably going to do that after we finish today.
So actually, the biggest thing I took away from this box, it wasn't even the stories themselves. It was actually something that Christopher Eccleston told me. Well, told obviously the audience, told us in the behind the scenes.
He told you specifically. He was like,
yeah. I learned a few things. Like obviously, I learned a few things in the behind the scenes. One of them was actually I'll get onto the main bit soon, but one of them was actually Nicholas Briggs saying on the filming of Dalek, Christopher Eccleston. It was very cold, and they were all like wearing big jackets on. He took him because they were in like a warehouse, I think, in the Millennium Stadium, like the actual like football rugby stadium in Wales. He took Nicholas Briggs down to a like basement area, and they practiced doing the scene. But Nicholas Briggs it wasn't the Dalek prop; it was actually him in the scene. And apparently Eccleston went like full force the same way he did in the actual scene, like getting right up in his face. And this was meant to be the scene where they were like it was like the call scene where he's calling the Dalek over the screen, but they're doing it right up and close. So apparently Eccleston got right up and close and personal with him. Was just like, why don't you just die?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, like apparently it was really intense, but it was a really big moment for Nick Briggs, being there with Eccleston, just rehearsing that scene face to face. He says it's one of his greatest memories. But the main thing I wanted to touch on was that I learnt in this behind the scenes from Chris Eccleston himself in the interview that apparently they took a break in filming before Dalek because Chris's dad got dementia and also had I think it was some kind of cancer or like a length in his chest. If I could be wrong on this, I believe his dad is still alive now, which is great. But at the time, he was getting through dementia and also suffering from an illness, and so he had to take time off from filming to look after his dad. But apparently, the reason why he's so fired up in Dalek is because he just came off looking after his father, and he was really, really pissed. And I think that is a really interesting story. The fact that rage from Dalek is actually genuine from the actor. And I think that's probably why the performance is so strong, is that it's Christopher Eccleston's actual genuine frustration and anger, seeing his father decaying, seeing the dementia take his father away, and also the illness that his father's going through. The fact that him using up all that pent-up frustration and anger on the illness and using it in his performance, I think that's why it comes off as so genuine in the scene. I loved hearing that story, and on top of that, apparently he had a very, very strong fondness for the story Father's Day because of that experience he was currently having at the time with his father. And that, again, aided his performance. He had such a strong, delicate connection with that story and those characters in it because of what he was experiencing with his father at the time, which, again, just makes his performance so genuine. So I loved learning that story. That was such a lovely bit. Yeah. And because this is the thing is, we hardly ever get interviews with him talking about, his time on Doctor Who.
Because the most we would have got would be Doctor Who Confidential during Series 1, and that would be pretty much it.
Yeah, but they never really went this personal.
Yeah. No.
And learning that story was just so amazing. I was absolutely gobsmacked when I heard that, and I think that it's really a testament that thing that he was struggling with at that point in his life created this brilliant performance that we got in Dalek and also Father's Day as well. It touches the heart, I think.
I imagine that would.
And I think it's honestly one of my favourite bits of trivia I've even read out on this channel.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to say before we get to conclusion and ratings?
Yeah. I think because we haven't really talked about the other side characters. You had like Faraday, you had Halloran, you had Marcus.
Yeah.
I think their inclusion, they did feel quite side note, but I think the idea that the story tried to do with them, I think was pretty neat.
Yeah.
I think I enjoyed some of their scenes together.
I really liked, because I believe, I could be completely wrong on this, but I believe Faraday appears. Does Faraday appear in Sphere of Freedom? Or is it only
I think
Food
so,
Fight? Yeah, because I loved how he briefly appeared in Sphere of Freedom during like the Roman fight, and then he goes away, and then
I like that
the Doctor gets him back in Food Fight, and Food Fight actually has a crowded TARDIS dynamic that works, unlike dinosaurs in a spaceship.
Yeah,
because it's actually earned.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
because
they're not just popped up out of nowhere.
Yeah, because him assembling the team works for the plot, and there's a reason for it. And it happens in the 3rd episode rather than right at the start.
Yeah.
Another fun fact was the actor who played Marcus Gallius was Dan Starkey, who plays Strax and a lot of the Sontarans.
Yeah, it was.
I recognised his voice straight away.
Yeah, I think I was looking up. I think when I was listening to Sphere of Freedom, I was just looking up the cast and who everybody was, and I was like, oh, this guy is Strax, and I was like, that's interesting. And then I heard it in his voice, and I was like, okay, yeah, I recognise him now.
Yeah. So obviously we rag on Strax a lot, but there is a Big Finish story called The Sontarans. I believe it's with David Bradley's First Doctor. I could be wrong on that, but I believe it's a David Bradley First Doctor story. But apparently it's amazing, and Dan Starkey plays like a much more serious Sontaran role in that, and apparently he's great in it.
That's good then.
Yeah, but I do think Dan Starkey is a really good actor. I just think some of the material in like Series 7 is poor for him. And like, when he's playing Strax. But to be honest, I actually really liked him in the Sontaran Stratagem 2-parter. Because remember when he gets killed and he's really happy about it?
Yeah. No, yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. Like, I was thinking about the Sontarans, and like they're the only time they are competent in the modern era is that story.
And also like, there's also like 1 minute in Name of the Doctor where they reverse time as well. That's the only other time.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about that 2-part. I was like, it's just a fun story, but then the Sontarans are actually competent for the most part.
Yeah.
Like the thing of them just annihilating UNIT, it's just like, yes, I want this. I want the villains to be competent. I want them to be smart, and they are. They do establish them as really, really very well stratagem.
Honestly,
very good.
Honestly, there's only a few stories on TV that get the Sontarans like really good. It's a shame, really, because they're such a great villain. But a lot of their stories just waste them. It's really sad.
Especially in the modern era.
Oh yeah.
Invasion of Time.
Oh god, Invasion of Time. The thing is, like, I love the 2 Doctors, but they're like, the Sontarans aren't even like a big part of it. They're just there. They are quite funny, but they're not really a main part of the plot. They're not even the main villain. They're just there. And then like
No, it's the bloody orange eyebrow people.
oh yeah, the bloody the augmented people. I can't remember what they're called, but Shockeye is the main one.
Because Jay brought it up a lot in the critique. So I'm like, okay.
Bloody
this doesn't look great.
bloody Shockeye is. I fucking love Shockeye. He's so funny. He's just. Oh, I can't wait till you watch the Two Doctors, because it's like I will accept a criticism saying it's not a good story, but I subjectively love the Two Doctors. It is so funny. The fact that Shockeye is this carnivore that just wants to eat meat and it always gets denied, and he's so pissing about it. And then, oh wait, do you know what happens to him at the end of the story? Do you know what the Doctor does to him?
No, I don't.
Oh, I don't know if I want to. I shouldn't spoil it because it's fucking brutal.
I'll get to it eventually.
It's one of the worst things the Doctor's ever done to someone. But man, that story is hilarious, and Colin Baker and Patrick Charlton are so good together. I just love how like Robert Holmes wrote the Caves of Androzani, and then after that they're like, next season you can write whatever the hell you want, and then he writes the fucking Two Doctors, and it's the biggest meme ever. Oh dear. Anyway, but yeah, the Sontarans, yeah, like the only story they have that I think is like actually a classic is their first one, which is the Time Warrior. Like the Sontaran Experiment and the Sontaran Stratagem I really like, and the Invasion of Time is a pile of shit. Two Doctors is really fun, but they're not the main villain. And the Strax is just crap. So, like even in the episodes he's in that I don't dislike as much, he's not one of the things that it's good about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, Sontarans have been.
It's just so funny how after the beginning of Series A, they're just forgotten about and have never been mentioned ever again.
I know, it's crazy.
The last appearance was Deep Breath, and that was it.
The thing is, they're in Victorian times, so it's almost like they're just waiting for the Doctor to turn up again, I guess.
Yeah, they're just sitting there like.
Yeah, I think they've just.
Haven't seen the Doctor in ages.
I think they've just gone into Big Finish territory now, because that's where they are now. They've crossed over with Jago and Lightfoot as well, so they're just off in that universe these days. I know that we're getting a Sontaran story in Series 13, but I don't know. I don't know if Black Armor is gonna be. I don't know if Black Armor automatically means good writing. Let's be honest.
It's no. But we know enough for the last few years that that is not what good writing is.
What I'm just wondering, where will it rank among like the 5 Sontaran stories that we have on TV, like the main ones, not the Strax ones, but like the main ones, because obviously I think the Invasion of Time is by far the worst one, and it's really bad. But I don't know, is this going to be better or worse than that?
Oh boy, it's going to be so fun when we get to that. When we get to Series 13.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
But if it's I'm telling you now, it's not going to be anywhere as good as the Time Warrior, because hardly anything is anyway. But yeah, anyway, so Dan Starkey's in this thing, and he's good. Big Finish has a knack for reusing actors all the time. They like to do that a lot. That just reminded me, I forgot to tell you it's on some stage, but I remember when I was listening to it last year. Bloody, you know the actor who plays Oliver Wood, you know the Quidditch guy in Harry Potter, like the guy that's like, you make a fair beater.
Yeah.
So that actor, I think his name's Sean Biggerstaff. He appears in one of the 8th Doctor Lucy Miller stories, I believe.
Oh wow,
it's crazy. I remember when I heard his voice, I'm like, that sounds so familiar. And then I went to the behind the scenes. I'm like, oh my fucking god, it's Oliver Wood.
Watch yourself, Harry.
Watch yourself, Harry. Wasn't that his last line?
Probably.
I don't even know.
And then he got shit kicked in by the bludger.
Oh, turfs. Anyway, what I want you to do is I want you to give a conclusion, and I want you to give each individual episode a rating out of 10, and then I want you to give the story as a whole a rating out of 10.
Okay. So, Ravagers overall, solid. It's got some neat ideas, does them pretty competently. Think it's a slow burner. At first, it's fine, but it needs slow build, and it does it pretty well. I think the Doctor is great. I think apart from some moments, some cringy dialogue and comedy didn't really work and wasn't really in line with his character. I think one of the biggest issues for me, just personally, I think the fact that I don't know where this is set in his timeline, it does bug me a bit, because I want stories like this to, especially when it's such a character that has a short lifespan in terms of TV and story, I want it to be quite set in where this is. But in terms of the plot, it's just fine. I've really liked the concept they did in most aspects. I think Nova as a side character / companion is competent, perfectly fine. Nothing massively terrible about her. She's perfectly fine. I think all this other side characters like Audrey, Faraday, all them, good. I think Audrey is definitely the standout out of all the side characters for sure. And yeah, it was just an overall really, really fun story with some nice moments, and I think it was as a start for the Ninth Doctor Adventures, plenty to build on for sure. There's plenty to build on off of this, and I do very much look forward to all the stuff they do, because I think there's a lot they can absolutely do with the Ninth Doctor. So I think Spearhead of Freedom, I'd probably give it a 5. I think it's just average and there's some neat stuff and it's just competent. I think a solid just 5. I think perfectly fine, but I think there's a lot it could have improved on. Cataclysm, I think I'd give it probably like a 6.5. I think it's a step up, I think, and I think there's a lot of really neat stuff about it. I think it's definitely, I think the comedy is probably where it's at its best there, I think, for sure. Especially with the, like we mentioned, with the guard. So that was just really funny. Yeah, and then Foo Fight, I'd probably give a 7. I think it's a really good conclusion to the story. I think there's a lot of really neat moments. I think how it all blends together and solves itself, I think, is really good. Really good stuff, I think. And just an overall pretty good conclusion. And I think the ending could have been better, but I look forward to seeing more of the characters of Doctor and Nova together. So overall, I'd probably give Ravagers, think I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10. I think it's a very, very solid story. I think it's competently told for the most part. I think character-wise it's fine, but I think there's more they could have done. There's definitely a lot of potential here that I think they could have developed on. But I think overall, fun, simple story, some nice moments, and I think 9 perfectly slips back into the role and is definitely the best part, character-wise and acting-wise, head and shoulders above the rest. But I definitely look forward to more. This is just the benchmark of future stories. I think it's perfectly fine, and I think it does a solid job. And it's pretty fun, pretty funny, and good times, I would say. So yeah, 6.5 out of 10 I would give Ravagers.
Nice. Yeah, so I thought Ravagers, I think I enjoyed it more on the second listen. The first listen, I wasn't really in the mood, and I was a little bit like, oh, this isn't like TV. But then I listened to it again, and I think I really just sunk my teeth into the story a bit more, and that helped. The first episode, Sphere of Freedom, very bog standard, very mediocre, bordering on weak at some points, I would say that it hits a very, very fine line of average for itself as a self-contained story. But where it shines is the setup it does for the next 2 episodes, and I think I give more praise in hindsight now that I know that the things that it was setting up actually ended up in a really good place. So I give credit there. I'm going to give Sphere of Freedom a 6. Cataclysm, really interesting continuation of this story. I thought that the comedy was much better in this, especially with the jail scene. Some of it's a little bit schlocky and a bit filler, and the stakes got raised a bit too high. But the time elements and Audrey's character, the way it shifted around, was really interesting. I thought this was definitely a step up from Sphere of Freedom, if with a few flaws to comment on that did upset me a little bit. I'll give this one a 6.5, and then I think Food Fight was definitely the best one. Still not perfect, still has a couple of iffy scenes like the TARDIS scene and the comedy at the very end, but has a few highlights as well, with some of the commentary on not only taking an alternative view at owning an empire business of games, and also the perspective of what people understand about With, depending on what point in time they are in, and also rounding off sort of having the Doctor and Nova's relationship told in this really unorthodox way, but having the Doctor be so convincing in his conviction and having him invite her on the TARDIS in a way that is interesting and different to what I've heard before. And I think there is a lot, like you said, a lot to build on, a lot of potential. There is things that need ironing out, but I thought this was an interesting concept, and with solid execution, was not bad, was decent, pretty good, but could have been better. But I thought this episode was the one that wrapped up things really satisfyingly, and we got some really, quite experimental stuff here. And I'll give Food Fight a 7.5. Very solid stuff. And I think the set as a whole, even though it starts off not the best, I think the overall experience and the way that the structure happens, it makes up for a lot of its shortcomings, and I think it just squeezes a 7 out of 10 from me in terms of Ravagers as a whole. So not amazing, but good, and I hope that from here they learn from some of the mistakes and they incorporate things that are missing, and also go bigger and better and further into what the potential of these Ninth Doctor Avengers could have. That's what I think. I believe it's in a couple of months we will be getting the next one, which is called...
I think it's July?
Yeah, we will be getting one called Respond to All Calls, which I know is 3 episodes. I don't know. I imagine it will possibly have an overarching story, maybe. But I know that each individual episode is written by a different person, so I would imagine the connection may be a bit looser. But we'll have to wait and see. There have been Big Finish box sets in the past with each individual episode written by a different person that carry one story over. That does happen sometimes. I'm not sure. Looking at the cover, interestingly, there's something on there that looks a bit like Snoke, which is quite funny.
Yeah, it does.
But I'm looking forward to it. I have a little bit of trepidation. I also noticed that the actress who plays Nova isn't credited on it, weirdly.
Yeah, she isn't. That's interesting.
So I'm just wondering if this takes place in the same timeline as post Ravagers or not. Very interested to see what they do here. But I know that, yeah, I could be wrong, but I believe the next box set is all original content as well. And then I think it's the third one and the fourth one are where they bring in the Cybermen and the Brigadier.
Yeah.
So the Cybermen story is the one that I think everyone's been going to wait for, because we've never gotten a Ninth Doctor Cybermen story, and it's the one of like the big 3 that you can do, because you can't do the Daleks because obvious reasons, and you can't do the Master because obvious reasons. But the Cybermen you can absolutely do with the Ninth Doctor in terms of the TV canon. So I'm really looking forward to that. I hope that they go big and bold with the Cybermen. I hope that they give us a really like gripping, quite different story, something we haven't seen before. I think that could be really cool. What are your hopes and dreams for the Ninth Doctor Adventures, Callum?
I hope it goes bigger and better, and I think it really plays into the sort of era of the Ninth Doctor. I think there's a lot of potential you can have in this sort of... Well, I hope they do establish at some point that it is in between, like him going back and forth in that scene with Rose at the end of the first episode. But I think there's a lot you can do, and I think there's a lot of potential here, and I think with Ravagers, it showed that there's a lot that they can do for sure, and I think the range they can do, I'm really interested to see how far they'll go, especially with the Cybermen, because obviously didn't ever interact with them apart from that one thing in Dalek in the glass case and sort of reference to it. But I think it would be very interesting to see Nine and the Cybermen and seeing how they interact I'm very looking forward to that. But I think there's a lot of potential here for sure, and I think if they go a bit more harder, and they try to structure it a bit better. I think Ravagers, overall structure is fine, but I think it could have been improved in some areas, and I hope they take that forward. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward to more of these, because I think this first one is very solid, and I hope they go bigger and better for the future ones.
Because I know they can, because they have done it in some places recently. Like the War Master box sets are quite recent. Like they obviously, they've come out within the last sort of 5-ish years, but that is recent when you think about Big Finish. That is recent, and the first 2 sets, because I haven't heard after that, but the first 2 sets, they do go big and better. They are some of the best Big Finish out there, in my opinion, especially the second one. Like, the Master of Callus box set is absolutely incredible. So I do hope that we get something really ambitious. I would love... I know. I don't think it's actually commissioned, based on things that I know so far. I'm not sure. But I would love to see James Goss write for the Ninth Doctor, because he is one of the best Big Finish writers that there's ever been. James Goss is so good. He's like... He's just... He takes things to places that no other writer really does. And whether that be light-hearted or dark, it doesn't matter. But the things that I've heard him do on Big Finish, he is so good. He's the man. Like, he is, in my opinion, the best writer they have going at the moment in the modern era of Big Finish. He even actually, funnily enough, he did a story, he did a couple of stories, I believe, for the 10th Doctor Adventures. If I'm correct in saying, I'm just going to look this up, because I know he did one called No Place that has Wilfred in it, and that one's really funny. It's like where they have this like fake reality TV show in a haunted house. It's hilarious. But he also did one called Death and the Queen, which is my favourite 10th Doctor Big Finish story I've heard, even though he's not really much of a factor in it, because it's more of a Donna story. But my god, that story is so good. It's really funny, but it's also really dark in some places. So he can do comedy really well, but even more than that, he can do darkness excellently. I've seen him do that with Derek Jacobi, and he is just... Oh, he's so good. I would love to see James Goss write for the Ninth Doctor. I hope he does. I don't think we are getting it yet, but I really do hope that he gets his hands on the Ninth Doctor at some point, because, fuck me, he is so good. I do know that we are getting some stuff with John Dorney writing the Ninth Doctor at some point, and I know that John Dorney is really good too. I really like his stuff. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up this video?
No, it's just nice to have the Ninth Doctor back and have a Doctor that you like and can enjoy in any story that's competent.
Exactly. Well, thank you for all joining us for our review of Ravagers. Hope you enjoyed the set too. Let us know what you thought in the comments. And I suppose, if all goes well, we'll see you next time for when we end up reviewing Respond to All Calls. Fingers crossed the good momentum carries on. Bye.